Bad news for you, Jonah. He's back. So, it's been a long time since I've bumped Doctor Who off a Sunday slot, but I know if I don't address this now, it's going to be bombarded at me until I do. So, the planned Doctor Who video for today is going to come out on Monday, which means that I'm going to talk about the fact that Sony and Disney came to terms. Spider-Man's back in the MCU, and a few other related things to talk about the general state of things. So, to recap quickly, the initial deal between Sony and Disney to share Spider-Man and how that was going to work, where Kevin Feige helped shepherd the Spider-Man film, not the ancillary films like Venom, but Spider-Man films directly over at Sony, and it allowed Spider-Man to show up in the Avengers movies, and for Tony Stark to show up in the Spider-Man movies, which was good for everybody. And in addition to that, Sony was keeping the vast majority of the money being made off that. But they also weren't, while they sell the rights to all these other, Spider-Man related things, again, like Venom and a bunch of other stuff that's in development, we'll come back to that, they couldn't integrate that in with the other Marvel stuff. It was only Spider-Man being shared. And that entire agreement had reached its end, as many films as had been agreed to had been finished. Now, at the renegotiating table, Disney had wanted to make it a case of a straight 50-50 split, because prior to that, Sony had been putting up the money for the Spider-Man films, which was why they took most of the income that came with that. And Disney wanted to do 50-50, which they would stump up 50% of the money for it, but they'd also get to keep 50% of whatever it generated. Sony didn't like that idea. Everybody walked away. Now, there was obviously a lot of outcry. A lot of people lost their freaking minds, which I still think was unnecessary, even if it had remained that way. But they're now back together. They worked it out. What is the deal now? It's now 25% of the budget and the returns that Disney will be taking. They'll pay a quarter of the cost for the next Spider-Man film, which has been confirmed to have the director of the last two coming back. And they will take 25%, and that's how it's going to be. Now, here's the thing that's sort of weird about this, and I think it's an important thing to remember. The way this entire thing played out is not very unusual. It's actually really standard for the industry. The difference is the degree to which the public was aware of it. Because these kinds of negotiations, whether it be between actors and studios, or studios and each other, or directors with producers, whatever, whenever these kinds of negotiations go on, this sort of back and forth of they come to the table, they say what they want, they say what they want, they leave the table, and so on paper the thing's dead, and then they reconvene later and move it forward. That's not uncommon. That happens actually a lot. Almost nothing gets worked out at initial talks, and it's pretty standard for both sides to draw a line in the sand, walk away, and then decide later, maybe we will talk again. And sometimes they don't, and so I don't want to imply that every single time there's this walk away, come back, work a deal. Sometimes they don't actually come back, but this whole process, incredibly standard, incredibly normal. What has changed, and I do think this is something that impacts the MCU specifically a bit more than it would any other franchise, though it could theoretically happen with other franchises as well, which is that basically this whole process happened in the public view. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, the whole inner workings of Hollywood are just simply not as obfuscated as they used to be. Not because they're being more transparent, just because it's a lot harder to keep this stuff completely behind closed doors these days. And sort of adding to that is the fact that Marvel and the MCU is always in the cultural talking points, because there's always a Marvel movie on the horizon. There's always the speculation of what are they going to do, what's the next show, what's the next movie, how will it connect. Basically, entertainment media, be it online, print, or anybody, never stops talking about Marvel. So that entire machine is just, it's on everybody's mind already. And so we're already looking at it way more closely. And the fact that it leaked out, I don't think was like any kind of intention. I don't think that it was actually a tactic, but it's just the eyes are so tight on this. And like, by design, Marvel and Disney have very much made the MCU a continuous talking point across almost all media. That's their intention. That's what they're doing on purpose, and they're very good at it. But this is one of the odd ways that kind of impacts what would otherwise be the normal process of making a movie, because suddenly a lot more people are watching your behind-the-scenes stuff than normally would be going on. Normally, this sort of stuff would just be interested to actual Hollywood insiders, people who it's their job specifically to track the inner workings of the industry. And there aren't that many people who actually do that, but there are a ton of people who track Marvel, and so we get this weird overlap where these kinds of negotiations where normally very few people would care, suddenly a ton of people cared. So it was weird, and the way that played out is honestly not that unusual. Now, there's a couple of other things that are believed but unconfirmed, but and normally I don't talk rumor, but I'm piggybacking it onto what we know has happened, so I'll just toss some stuff in there. There's word that there will be allowed some degree of integration of Sony's extended Spider-Man stuff with the MCU. Now, if I were to guess, I do not think that means we're suddenly going to have Venom showing up in an Avengers movie. I don't see that happening. Nor do I see like something, like Planet of the Symbiotes or something like that becoming the next Avengers story. I don't see that happening. Like, especially because the process of renewing this deal already kind of fell apart and then came back together. I don't think Marvel's going to want to tie things any more tightly together with what Sony's planning to do than they already have. However, what I would kind of expect is basically what happened with the Marvel Netflix stuff, which is that there will be acknowledgments, name drops, just connective tissue that links them in the same world. I would not expect actual crossovers to happen. Although this might make it more likely that Venom or one of these other characters that they're building movies around, like Morbius and Kraven and the new one that they're apparently working on, again, coming back to it, may actually show up in Spider-Man's movie. But again, I don't think that means they will ever cross over to the MCU. I cannot imagine either Marvel or Disney or even Sony really wanting to like entangle things any more awkwardly than they already are, because then every time the current agreement expires, it becomes more stuff that needs to be detached and worked on. And I think it's primarily still going to be Spider-Man himself who crosses over. It's just Sony might be able to do more with him connecting to their other stuff, which will then by proxy connect things like Morbius, Kraven, and Venom to the MCU. But again, direct crossover, I do not see that happening. So the one other thing that got announced, again, let's just piggyback it all together. They're apparently starting work on a Madam Web movie, which is a very weird idea. Like, not necessarily from Sony. This is the same studio that wanted to make a Sinister Six movie made up of villains that hadn't been introduced in the main series yet, and we're planning to do a prequel starring Aunt May as a spy. So, like, they're tossing out a lot of weird ideas, most of which have not moved forward, but some of them are now. And it's a weird idea. Madam Web is kind of difficult to explain, but long story short, she's not a character you would actually base a story around. She's a connective tissue kind of character. She's never had her own book, so far as I know. I mean, maybe a one-off or a miniseries that I'm unaware of, but she's never headlined her own book. And she's the kind of character, she's generally, not every interpretation, because she's shown up in cartoons or whatever, but generally speaking, she's blind, she's precognitive, she's got some level of psychic whatever, and she sort of has this interconnectedness with spider characters. And that's kind of it. Like I said, she's a connective character. She's the kind of character that you use to bring two people who might not otherwise have a reason to cross paths together through her or interactions with her. She's very good for that. But building a movie around her, at the very least building a movie around her as the actual main character, makes almost no sense without a massive reworking for what she is. What makes a little bit more sense, though, is if they wanted to make her the connective tissue of basically linking more spider-related characters, and in effect end up doing a live-action equivalent to Into the Spider-Verse. Not necessarily like a literal direct equivalent where you are crossing dimensions or whatnot, but if they wanted to use her as the pivot point to introduce a heck of a lot of other Spider characters in live action, the way that Into the Spider-Verse introduced a heck of a lot of alternate versions of Spider-Man in animation, She would work for that. Is it a good idea? No, I really don't think so. But, I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of you could actually do with her. There's a little of other stuff going on. Kevin Feige is going to help with the next Spider-Man movie, which, I mean, who knows what it's going to be called. They're going to have to come up with something with a home name. We've had Homecoming and Far From Home. Next one could be, I don't know, could be Home Again, could be Home Alone. That'd be fun. But whatever it ends up being, it's going to have, Tom Holland's back, the director's back, and Kevin Feige helping with it again, which means that we can expect a consistency with the previous Spider-Man films. And I think that was the most legitimate fear, especially because when we found out about the deal falling apart previously, the director hadn't been confirmed to come back yet. So what the big fear, I think, or at least I think the most reasonable fear was that when a third Spider-Man movie happened, which of course was always going to happen, that it would feel disconnected from the first two that had a consistent creative team behind it, and that Sony would just plug whoever they could get into a third one just to get it made. Thankfully now that is very much not going to be the case. Does that now suddenly mean every Spider-Man movie forever is going to be great? Well, who the heck knows? We're still getting Venom 2, which is being directed by Andy Serkis, which I'm kind of curious about. And the first Venom was fun. It was dumb. It wasn't great. It was very outdated in its approach to everything. But it was fun. There were certainly elements worth pulling out and building on, and the main one of those elements is the relationship between Venom and Eddie. And so when your lead character dynamic is like the best thing about the movie, yeah, you could build a better sequel around that. We'll see if they actually do. And of course, Morbius is still moving forward. Oh, and like whoever the writers are for Morbius, they're working on Madam Web as well, which also makes me nervous because it always gets me nervous when it looks like someone's gotten a new screenwriting gig on the strength of them having written something that hasn't come out yet. That always makes me nervous because I don't trust studio executives to have a good sense of quality. Because what studio executives tend to really like in scripts are things that connect to marketing and saleability, not necessarily a good actual script. So, like, if a hired screenwriter delivers a script that has a ton of marketable characters and a ton of franchise potential, then studio heads tend to love it until the movie comes out and sucks, and they're like, oh, crap. But, so, like, that makes me a little nervous just because it smells of putting too many eggs in too few creative baskets when it comes to the whole Spider-Man extended films thing. But it's still early days for that, so who knows? The Venom 2 movie might be significantly more polished. The Morbius movie might even be good. I think that one has potential to work as a standalone. I don't, who knows? Who knows where this thing's going to go, but regardless, Spider-Man still gets to be in the MCU, and the third Spider-Man film will have the core creative team back in place. So, everybody relax. And, just chill. Like I said, this is actually business as normal. We just normally don't have eyes on it. Standard stuff. What are your thoughts on this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comment. Let's talk about it. If there's other stuff down there as well, link to my Patreon. Help me out. It'd be really appreciated. Plus, subscribe to see the videos when they pop up. There's the bell as well, if it helps you. The like button is a big help. When you folks hit it, it does actually help me out there. There's other links besides. Click on them. Do things or don't. You don't have to, because I'm not going to tell you what to do. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.